Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, March 11th, 2021. The time is 4:01 p.m. I'd like to call to order this continuation of the March 4th, 2021 public hearing regarding property at 70 Maple Road. This hearing is being held electronically using a virtual meeting platform Zoom in an effort to comply with Governor Cooper's executive order. We do have a quorum present. We have the voting members consist of Cindy Burnett, David Alzamora, Jack Farrell, myself, Julia Latham, and Philip Shoemaker has been appointed as an alternate voting member for this hearing. I'll remind everyone that our procedure today is being videotaped. It's important to speak directly into microphones. We'll proceed a little more slowly and deliberately with things such as swearing in to make sure that everyone has been given an opportunity to speak and that the due process is ensured for our applicant and the public. Finally, please no usage of the chat function in Zoom in order to maintain the transparency of this meeting and comply with our sunshine laws. For all witnesses with us here today, if you have previously been sworn in, please remember that you remain under oath and need to offer truthful testimony to this panel. And as a final reminder for our board, our decision must be based on competent material and substantial evidence that has been properly entered into the record. Materiality means that the evidence shows whether one of the standards for our consideration will or will not be met. Since we last were together, we have additional materials that have been added to our packet. So at this time, I'd like to call on Peter Hughes to update the board regarding the exhibits that are now properly part of our packet.
Thank you. I'm going to restate the case and why we're here today. The purpose of this public hearing is to receive testimony for the variance request from Section 9.2A, Tables of Dimensional Requirements for the property address is 70 Maple Road, further identified by Moore County PID number 000-18218. This property is located within the R10 zoning district in the local historic preservation overlay district. Specifically, the applicant and owner, Jason Tanner, is requesting a variance from the 30-foot minimum front yard setback. This is the front elevation photo that was shown last week at our hearing. I'm going to breeze through what we previously have covered and skip to what the new information has been presented.
We're not seeing your document.
My apologies. Lori, can you show my screen, please? We don't see it on the monitors inside Village Hall or on the screen.
Are we waiting on that image?
Yes, ma'am, we are. Is that the best we can do, Lori, with the Zoom platform? There we go. So last time we met, there was confusion over the front yard our current existing front yard setback. Here's the original survey that was submitted, Exhibit H in your package today, showing that 22.73 existing setback, and that's measured to the patio, not the steps. The applicant did submit an updated site plan showing what is proposed, which is that 21.5 foot setback, which would be approximately a 1.23 increase. The existing home is at 7.27 feet into the setback. If we approve what was being requested, it'd be allowing for a new setback 8.5 feet into the required 30 feet. This is a blown up version showing you guys that in case we need to talk about it later for clarity. In addition to that, the applicant has submitted updated floor plans showing the dimensions. They did this to show the current depth. As you can see on the screen here, the current depth of the patio is roughly 6 feet and 3 inches. And then the proposed plans both show the existing depth of 6 feet 3 inches, and then the proposed addition of 1.5 feet or 16 inches, and that 21.6 inch setback from the street.
Which exhibit was that, please, Peter?
That was Exhibit N in your current packet, and the one before that was Exhibit M.
Thank you.
This is the historic photo that was previously submitted. We're going to look at this later as it relates to the expansion proposed historic relevance. The applicant has also submitted tape measured photos of the existing porch to show that it is at that 6 feet 3 inches. I did augment the photos to line up so that tape measure kind of is consistent. They were 2 separate photos, and I just did that so that we can kind of see it as one photo. Additional material that were not included in the staff presentation included 2 letters, or sorry, an email and a letter submitted by concerned parties. I'm going to pull that up on the screen now for you. There was an email from Bart Boudreau, who lives within the historic district, stating that he was in favor of this, as well as a letter from adjacently notified property members, the Thompsons. They were also voicing support for this as well, and that's for your guys' consideration. In addition to that, the applicant, Jason Tanner, sent staff an email pointing out 65 Cherokee's previous request and asked us to include his email and also the minutes from the 65 Cherokee request, which are Exhibit W and X accordingly. And that would be all updated exhibits submitted by the applicant. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Does anyone on the board have any questions for Peter at this time?
I have one question in reference to the R10 zoning district and the 30-foot setback. Can you tell me why it was set at 30 feet in this neighborhood?
Yes, ma'am. So setbacks are generally decided on to maintain a character or consistent design from lot to lot. It has to do with building separation, allowing for things like sidewalks to be put in and encroach into those setbacks, allows for utilities to be placed in. So there's a lot of different reasons why setbacks are established. The distances of setbacks are usually regulated to the size of the property. The bigger the property, the bigger the setback typically corresponds. It also has to do with environmental sustainability. More open space on a lot provides drainage availability, so it impacts it in different ways, and that's why that setback is established, is for those different reasons. So it's a collection of reasons why setbacks are established.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Peter before we move on to our applicants? Okay, great. Mr. Tanner, I'll remind you, as I did Peter, that you're under oath, and do you have any additional comments you'd like to make in regard to the exhibits that you're offering us today?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us. And I think Dan is there too, correct, in the hall? Is he present?
He is.
Okay. I think my application's been updated. And I put into the application the way we feel that this house was built before setbacks, or there was an ordinance, and we'd like relief from the setback ordinance imposed after the fact that this home was built to have a usable porch. And so I updated the application, and I feel like the application and the letters that we received from neighbors accurately reflect the way that we feel about having a usable porch and restoring this front porch to a historic home, and have a usable porch in the neighborhood. It's very important to us to be a part of the neighborhood, and I think it would reflect really well on the neighborhood as well. I know that right now the front of the house is unsightly. It's not, one person can sit on that porch, and we'd love to have a usable porch and to enjoy it with family and friends. It's very important to us. And I think And I'm sorry, I think Mr. Degree can kind of explain why we chose this type of addition or adding to it that would best suit us. He could probably better explain that, but we hope the board will even look back at 65 Maple and they had, or excuse me, 65 Cherokee, that the same difficulties that we did in restoring their home and the challenges that they face. And we're hoping that the board will give us some relief from the setback ordinance and believe that that the positives definitely outweigh the negatives by granting this variance.
Thank you. Any questions from the board for Mr. Tanner before we address Mr. Degree?
Say that again, Julia.
I'm sorry, was that Jack?
Yes, say that again. I didn't quite understand that.
I just asked if there are any questions from the board for Mr. Tanner before we ask Mr. Degree to provide his testimony.
I have one comment. You're referencing 65 Cherokee Road, and their request was for a 4-foot encroachment, correct?
Yes, a 4-foot variance.
And yours is an 8.5 foot, is that correct?
Well, so again, it goes back to this house was built before ordinance or setbacks or zoning. So we were already encroaching in, I guess, a few different areas, but I don't know how the road in 1914 went. Was it caused by the city in constructing the road there? I just don't know, but if the house was built today, we could easily, it's a huge lot. We could easily push the house back to accomplish it, but the house in several different areas is encroaching. I know the back carriage house, the pool house, and the front. So it's unique to this that this house was built before all these ordinances came into effect.
I understand that. For clarity, I believe their request was for a 4-foot encroachment and yours is for an 8.5 foot. Is that correct?
Well, my understanding is that it's established already that there's an encroachment now. We're asking for additional 16 inches on top of that. Is my understanding the legal version of that. Peter could probably explain that, but
for a total
it's
of
already been
8.5
accepted.
feet.
We're not applying for that today, but yes, that would be the setback
Okay.
if granted. And I think just to add additionally, as other people pointed out, that 16 inches added to the current porch is negligible at best looking at it, but would provide us so much more livable space to use for our front porch.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Tanner at this time?
Not at this time.
Okay. Mr. Degree, you're present?
He is walking to the microphone currently.
Okay. I'll remind you, Mr. Degree, that you remain under oath. Please go ahead and offer your updated testimony to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we did go back and revise the plans in an effort to make it clearer as to what we would like to be able to do. And so if you take a look at that first drawing that's up there now, you'll see that the red area indicates what we're asking for the additional size of the front porch, which is a total of 16 inches roughly. That shape was derived by the existing architecture that we had. That was the widest that we felt we could go for both a structural and aesthetic reason. So making the porch wider would just make the project more difficult to build and not as attractive. That extra depth will provide Mr. Tanner with much more livable, usable space when several people are out there on the porch at the same time. I honestly have been out there again, took additional measurements, and when you stand at the street and you look at what we're asking for, it's negligible that anybody would ever even notice that we were given that amount of space as far as how it feels from where you're standing out on the road or the sidewalk, but it makes a tremendous amount of difference when you're on the porch looking back to the street. Questions?
Any questions for Mr. Degree? Are you finished?
Ma'am?
Any questions from the board for Mr. Degree?
No questions at this time?
I have one. Did you consider doing a porch on the side of the house? Because I know if you had a porch there, you would also be able to see the street.
Yeah, but it's truly not the same for anybody's house under any condition. You know, a porch is a very American piece of architecture. The porch originated here. I mean, this is something that you do. You historically sit on the front porch and you interact with the community. If we put them on the side, that interaction is gone. They may have a sight line to somebody walking by, but they're not going to have this kind of reaction with them. It's not the same. So I think that would not even come close to giving Mr. Tanner what he's looking for.
So that wasn't never considered?
Never considered.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I guess in the spirit of last week, I'll go ahead and say I did stop by the house. I wanted to view the porch and see the actual situation that, you know, we're deciding on. One thing I noticed in front of the porch were two white pipes. Are those utilities, or do you know what those?
In the ground? I'm assuming they were fairly low to the ground?
Yeah, they're basically just screw caps.
Clean out for the sewer.
Okay, perfect. I just wasn't sure, or if those would be impacted at all with this addition.
Not at all. You know, we're going to add a picket fence out front on the property line. And then, of course, we're going to do substantial landscaping. And so that's going to act sort of as a buffer to the house. It's going to start to set a scale up. So it's not like we're trying to encroach and be and embolden ourselves and be on the street. You know, this is purely functionality on the perspective of the homeowner. We're just with the street and then the sidewalk and then the fence and then the landscaping. I think that layered effect is really going to soften how close that house actually appears. I think even more so than where it sits now if we weren't to do any of those other items to enhance.
I don't think anyone in the community would argue that your enhancements, whatever they turn out to be, are going to be an improvement. And the village is thrilled to see someone come forward and take on the job of rehabilitating one of these cottages, no question about that. So it's not a matter of we're in any way not pleased that someone is willing to work on this cottage.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to ask if there was any further discussion or any further questions from the board for either Mr. Hughes, Mr. Tanner, or Mr. Degree.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. It seems that the fundamental basis for this variance, as evidenced in the documentation repeatedly, is that they wish to return it to the original historic as it was built or as it was historically in the past. I fail to see the evidence of this, to tell you the truth. The photograph is could be misleading. I mean, it looks to me the same, and it shows no width changes. I mean, it's impossible to tell the width, and it doesn't show the architectural renderings that are going to be put, or the overhang that's going to be built, at least proposed. So that's, with the exception of the the railing. I see no difference in what there is today. The second, so if there's additional evidence to support the claim that it's being returned to its original grandeur or its original form, I just don't see it in the evidence. The second question is somewhat of a matter of, maybe I'll direct this a little bit to you, Julia. The reference to the 65 Cherokee decision, it seems that rarely are two variance requests identical in the facts. And in the case of 65 Cherokee, this particular dwelling, 65 Cherokee, having worked in the archives for 11 years and written multiple books about the cottages within Pinehurst, the 65 Cherokee was one of the original dozen or so cottages built by the Tufts in 1895, prior to the village being opened. And in fact, so it's incredibly important historically. And in fact, there are a number of photographs from 1896 of the 65 Cherokee honeysuckle cottage. It was originally named Good Luck, but in any case, the original photographs were used as the basis of the addition that Mr. I guess Wayne brought them forward and returned the front to exactly how it looked in 1896 when the photographs were taken. So the facts are substantially different in this case because equating it to the honeysuckle cottage, the 65 Cherokee, I think it just isn't the same set of facts, as a matter of fact. So I question why we are using that as a basis for any kind of precedent or decision.
In response to that, I'll say, as I said last week, that the Board of Adjustment is not a board that operates on precedent. There is no concept of res judicata or anything like that that happens in a hearing. There is no case precedent. And I'll agree with you, Jack, that if you look at 65 Cherokee, the members, I believe Cindy, who was on the board at that time, will recall that that application was actually for the front porch as well as a laundry room. And the laundry room was encroaching into the side easement, and that part of their application was not granted. The only thing that was granted was the restoration of that front porch. So you're correct in that statement, Jack. However, I caution that we are not, as a board, bound by precedent, and the Board of Adjustment is a board that changes periodically with the different folks who sit on the board. And all we can do is take a look at the unique facts that are available in each case as they pertain to a particular piece of land, and then our 4 criteria, and do our best to apply our admittedly subjective viewpoint on those 4 criteria. So there is expected to be a certain amount of variation in outcome, and that's simply the nature of the beast. We try our best to provide some obvious fairness and due process for the folks who come before us, but it is by no means, these hearings are by no means something that are built on a basis of case law.
Yeah, my only point was that that variance request had a substantial number of different facts related to it because of the cottage and what had been done to it previously, and the fact that it was well documented as to the changes that occurred and its original form, which is completely lacking in this case, unfortunately.
Can I say something?
Yes.
You may go ahead, Mr. Tanner.
Okay. my interpretation of Cherokee Road, and I know, Jack, you have a lot of history with this, but my interpretation of Cherokee Road was, it went into a lot of discussion about the hardship created about imposing these new ordinances, not new, but ordinances and setbacks after this cottage was built, regardless of the significance of the cottage between 1895 and 1914. It still is a hardship to us that the village is imposing this setback requirement on a home that was built before basically these ordinances were imposed. And so I think that's the language we took from it. And I removed the historic aspect to our application. I personally think that the porch looks bigger originally, but that's my interpretation. I wish we had more photographs. We don't. The planning department, my understanding, burned down. These are just the set of circumstances we're working with now. And for us, it's a hardship. And it's discussed with them being the same type of hardship based on the time this cottage was built. And the same is in effect for our cottage as well. The same hardship we're enduring now. We want relief from that.
Yeah. In response, I will say, Mr. Tanner, when you look at the breadth of the discussion that we had regarding the cottage at 65 Cherokee, the final decision was not based on the fact that there were zoning requirements that were imposed on the village after the time that the building was created, because quite frankly, the majority of properties here in Pinehurst, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, were built before the imposition of zoning requirements at incorporation. If we saw all zoning requirements as a hardship, the Board of Adjustment would be in a really difficult place to enforce anything as far as additions or expansions into setbacks. I think with 65 Cherokee, and here I'm speaking for myself, a large part of what I was looking at was the fact that it was a historical property, which is the case with your property. And I will say that my viewpoint, and this is only my viewpoint, I'm inclined to agree with you, Mr. Tanner, that when I look at that picture, I do see a deeper porch. And I also see an opening in that stairway entry that aligns differently with the door than it appears to in present day, which to me gives an indication that there was at some point a substantial alteration to the front of this cottage. And in that regard, my subjective opinion differs from Mr. Farrell's. I don't know where the rest of the board is with that, and I'm sure we'll get to that with our discussions. But thank you for responding.
Thank you. And I agree with you. Just my interpretation that even the tall boy, most people's shoulders are almost 2 feet apart. And you can see right on the edge of the porch, that would mean there was only 4 feet left if that was the original porch, because they're standing sideways to the porch. And yes, I think looking at the porch to me as well, it just looks like a deeper porch originally.
I noticed that Mr. Shoemaker's hand was up earlier. Was there a question, Philip, that you wanted to ask?
No, I think Jack covered it. I was just going to ask if they uncovered any additional information about the original porch, and I think we've covered that. Also, I just wanted to clarify, I have 2 screens here, so if it looks like I'm looking away, I have 2 monitors. I didn't want somebody to think I was not paying attention.
Okay, thank you. The other folks on the board, are there any other questions for Mr. Tanner or Mr. Degree at this time? If not, I'd like to turn our discussion to the evidence before us and what we can and cannot consider in this case. Okay, hearing no discussion, I'm going to ask at this time, because I can't see, Peter, is there anyone else in person in the audience or available, Kelly, via the live feed who's providing sworn testimony, wishes to provide sworn testimony in this matter?
Isn't, and we did not receive any comments via email.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in the Village Hall who wishes to provide testimony?
No, ma'am, there's no one else here.
Okay, so at this time, I know that we're in possession of an email from Mr. Boudreau and a letter, I believe, from the Thompsons. Since neither are present to be cross-examined, their testimony before this board is not considered, pardon me for the legal speak here, but is not considered competent because we are not able to cross-examine them on the substance of their testimony. Is there any discussion about that amongst the board?
No, I think that's correct. I know Mr. Boudreau quite well personally, and I have a great deal of respect for him. However, these two letters in support do not seem to be the type of evidence that makes that should be brought into the consideration.
Yeah, there are really two problems. The first is that they're not here to be cross-examined, which goes to the so-called competency of them, although obviously Mr. Boudreau and the Thompsons are competent people, and we value their participation in this matter. And then secondly, as Jack has brought up, there's a certain question of materiality, and opinion testimony is only appropriate before our boards in the when it's expert opinion testimony, for example, regarding property values. And in this case, the testimony needs to go to one of our four considerations. And looking at what they suggested, one could make an argument that perhaps it goes towards hardship, or perhaps it goes to the question of the whether or not the variance application is consistent with the spirit, purpose, or intent of the ordinance. However, we're not really in a position where we can truly evaluate that. So I'm going to ask at this time that those two pieces of testimony be not considered by this board in coming to our determination.
Understand. Thank you.
Yeah. If there's no further questions for our witnesses, I'd like to open the floor to a conversation by the board. We can do one of two things at this time. We can either close the public hearing if the board is confident that they're going to have no more questions for our witnesses, or we can leave our public hearing open and enter our debate on the merits on our own. Does anyone feel strongly one way or the other?
By leaving the hearing open, we can still ask for and get information, additional information from the applicant. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. If we close the hearing, then we would have to reopen in order to address them.
It may be that the applicant can offer additional information, so I would prefer, at least personally, to keep it open.
I'm fine with
Okay.
that.
Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to address the public and whoever might be viewing on the live feed, and let folks know that if anyone is interested in providing competent, relevant testimony as to this variance, then you need to go ahead and contact Kelly Brown at kbrown@vopnc.org. We will need your name, address, and your association to the public hearing item. And if based on that, we suspect that you have standing, we would then need written consent to proceed with the hearing and allow you to enter your testimony into the record. I'm going to propose that we take a 5-minute recess to allow members of the public to bring any testimony forward in the interest of due process. So it is now 4:36. So I'll suggest that we reconvene at 4:41 for deliberation on this matter. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Kelly, are you there?
Yes.
Did we have anyone contact us during the 5-minute recess?
We did not.
Terrific, thank you very much. It appears to me at least that everyone is back with us. So we'll go ahead and continue. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and summarize the application before us very quickly. Mr. Tanner, the applicant, is proposing a 21.5-foot setback from the front property line for the property at 70 Maple Road. This is a historic home built circa 1915. The existing encroachment of the front porch is approximately 7.27 feet into the setback, and this request would allow for an additional 1.23 foot encroachment in order to accommodate the front porch expansion. At this time, I'm going to I'll remind the board that we have standards of review for a variance application. The first is that unnecessary hardship would result from strict application of the ordinance. This does not necessarily have to demonstrate that in the absence of the variance, no reasonable use could be made of the property. That the hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property, such as location, size, topography, hardships resulting from personal circumstances, as well as hardships resulting from conditions that are common to the neighborhood or the general public, cannot be the basis for granting a variance. The hardship needs to not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. However, the act of purchasing property with the knowledge that the circumstances exist shall not be regarded as a self-created hardship. And finally, the requested variance has to be consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance so that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the board for discussion on this application.
I'll go back to what Jack said. Looking at the pictures after reviewing the porch today, I think it's the same porch. So the hardship being, returning it to a historical place, I don't think exists, because if it's the same porch, then you don't have to return it to anything. That being said, I don't think that a hardship does not exist. I think not being able to use this home the way that you intend to, it is a hardship. It's unique to this property in the sense that the house, I mean, again, if it were built today on this same lot, would be arranged differently so that it wouldn't be encroaching in any setbacks. That's not where we are, unfortunately. Another hardship that I could see is not being able to restore this porch into, one, something that's usable, and two, something that looks better. You're going to be compared to all the other beautiful homes in the village of Pinehurst around you. And I mean, it could be a hardship to have the ugly one, if for lack of a better way of putting it. So although the hardship is not, the historical porch doesn't settle for me, I think there is a hardship here in that the applicant can't use the property the way that they would like to. They can't participate with the community in the way that they would like to. And they can't restore what is currently an eyesore compared to, the beautiful homes around them, not being able to do that. I do see a hardship there. And I think if you're, based on the testimony earlier about why setbacks exist, because they want to, promote some harmony and some standards for visual aspects of an area. If all this does is increase the visual appeal of the property, I think it's in line with those guidelines, and consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. That's how I feel.
I think David makes some very good points there. It pains me to take a little bit of the opposite side of that, being a historic, very much involved in the history of Pinehurst and creating and maintaining our historic nature. But the hardship, as described in the documentation supplied by the applicant, is, and I'm quoting here, "The hardship is that they want to return the home to a useful and historically accurate state by returning the front porch to its original size." And there's no evidence that, in fact, that is the case. So the basis of the hardship comes apart based on that. And so, speaking of hardship only, this is not unique. This characteristic, setbacks within the historic district particularly, this property, this is not unique to this property. And in fact, the applicant acknowledges as much by an Exhibit P, his updated application dated March 8th. He said, "This hardship is not uncommon to homes in the historic village of Old Town Pinehurst." So that's an acknowledgement that this is in fact common to the neighborhood and the neighborhood in the area. So it's not really something unique and special to this particular property. So those two things are an issue for me.
Can I say one thing? Just a response to what, I did update the variance application, so Jack, I'm sorry, I didn't catch his last name, I can't see on the screen, but you're referencing the old application. I provided an updated application to say that we wanted to update the porch to be usable. We can't prove.
Excuse me, I'm reading from the March 8th, 2021 signed application, Exhibit P, as in Paul.
Okay, I submitted an updated application. I just wanted to let the board know, and my understanding was submitted at your request to do an updated application.
Lori, can you share my screen? Because there are two applications. The updated one is included as Exhibit P.
Well, if it helps at all, I will note that as a board, we are not bound to a finding of hardship as indicated by the applicant. And this board has at times noticed that at times applicants state things perhaps not as artfully as possible. And this board has found hardship other than that which was designated by the applicant based on the testimony that they've provided and the discussion at hearing. So I do not believe that this board's hands, if you will, are bound by the sort of four square words in the application.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah, my 2 cents on that.
However, the fundamental basis for this appearing in almost all the exhibits is the claim that the historic front of this house is different than that currently exists. And that's not in evidence, to my opinion.
Yeah. And I'll agree, Jack, even though I take a slightly different view than you and David do as to the way I'm viewing that front porch, I'll agree that it is at best somewhat ambiguous. However, I do agree with David that in looking at hardship, you have to look at the character, in my mind. You have to look at the character of the neighborhood. Now, in my neighborhood, not being able to sit on your front porch and enjoy the ambiance of the street, the community that exists is non-existent because I live in the ETJ on 5 acres. If I sat on my front porch, I'd only see trees. I can see if I was in the heart of the village and had a historic property that the ethos of the community is completely different. And there would be, in my mind, a hardship of not being able to interact with my community, with my neighbors, as I want. In this regard, my opinion goes more towards the way David is looking at this situation. It's my 2 cents.
My,
Philip?
my current house has a front porch of 6 feet in depth, and my wife and I sit on the front porch quite often and observe the passing scene.
When I look at this, I consider a hardship would be that you could not have a front porch. And this one being, when I looked at the porch, it looked to me like you could easily get 2 chairs out there. Now, you would not be able to get, 4 or 6, but a hardship would be that you could not have a front porch, and you can. And the other, what I'm concerned of, the closer it gets to the road, and there's no way to prove, but you've got an intersection right there, and I hear you're going to put a fence up, so that's a little bit of a barrier. But you have a front porch, you can replace that front porch, and you can, I think you could get 2 chairs out there. So it's not as a hardship, in my opinion. And, but it is a condition that is common in the neighborhood. So this is not something, a hardship of a condition. It's typical out there. So.
Philip, anything to add?
I'm out of here. No, sorry, hit the wrong button there. Nothing that would be material that hasn't already been said. I would add that the photo is very subjective to the person looking at it. And just as there's evidence, we're stating that it looks as if it hasn't been altered, but there's also evidence that maybe it has been altered. I mean, you can interpret it either way. I tend to agree with Julia and David. I believe there is a hardship here. Maybe not as stated in the application, but I don't have anything else to add other than that.
Thank you. Any further discussion by the board, or is there someone who would like to bring a motion before us at this time?
So this has to meet all 4 conditions, correct?
Julia, you need to close the public hearing if you guys are going to make a
Oh,
motion.
excuse me. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. And yes, Cindy, in order for us to grant a variance, all 4 conditions must be met. Okay, if there's no further discussion by the board or any questions for the witnesses, do I have, well, let me ask, are there any more questions for the witnesses before we close the public hearing? Okay, do I have a motion before the board to close the public hearing and re-enter our regular Board of Adjustment meeting?
I'll move to close the public hearing and move back into our regular meeting.
Second.
Okay, a motion is made by Cindy and seconded by, I believe, Jack. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion has been made and carried. We are closing our public hearing and re-entering our regular Board of Adjustment meeting. We have the option at this time to approve the variance as written. We can approve the variance with conditions. We can also deny the application for the variance. I'll remind you that in order, granting the variance requires 4 votes of this board. This time, do we have a motion before us? Oh, and I will remind you that Peter has provided in our packet a suggested outline, which helps us put forward a motion and make sure that we are giving a proper consistency statement. So at this time, I'll ask if there's any member of our board who has a motion that they'd like to bring.
I just have one quick question.
Yes.
If we were to approve, the Historical Preservation Committee or board still has a check on what it could look like or different, I guess, the details of what the property would look like afterwards.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah, they deal with the congruous appearance more than anything, so they will definitely take a look at the architecture and whether or not it is congruous with the rest of the historic district.
Um,
Thank you, Jack.
Also, it appears that just one corner of the porch exceeds the 8.5 feet out or into the setback. So if you could do a condition that no more than that corner would protrude into the setback, because if we approve this, then the setback would be moved up and they could add anything on either side of this, is that correct?
Oh, yeah,
That's, Peter, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that is correct. And then we also have to remember that any variance that is approved runs with the land.
That is correct.
So then, moving forward, anyone who purchased this property could build anything within that setback from either side.
That is correct. They could build within, they would have a setback of 21.5 feet.
Unless we conditioned it, is that correct?
That's correct.
That's a tough condition going forward, believe me. Someone's got to remember that one.
I see that David is taking a look at the plat, so I'm going to wait a moment and let him go ahead and. Cindy, do you have something in mind in asking your question?
Just for clarity and, what the options were. Because, I mean, I agree that when you buy a home, you want it to be the way you want it to be. And it's not intruding that much more than what is existing right now, but the existing porch is there. But if we do agree to this new setback, we're opening up the whole area for development in the future. Not saying that this owner would. So just.
Right, it is possible that somebody could run a very strangely shaped porch that extends, fully within the,
Well, someone at a later date could tear this house down and build a 2-story house, 20 feet from the road. Not that they
21.5,
would,
yes, you're correct.
without having to come before the board for a new variance,
That's correct.
considering everything that what we're doing here.
That's correct.
If I could add just one thing, we bought this
Sir,
house.
I'm sorry, we are
Oh,
no
sorry.
longer in public hearing.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just going to explain
Sorry.
that. Yeah, it's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Tanner.
We have a technical difficulty.
I myself am trying to figure out how to put forward a motion that would be conditional and not end up with the result that Cindy has suggested. So that is the The reason for my pause, if anyone else has a motion that they're working on, please feel free.
Well, I have a hard time with the hardship from conditions that are peculiar to the property, because this is typical for all of the homes in the historic district. It isn't just specific to this.
And I think it's particular, this home is slanted at a complete angle on the lot. I think if it were built today, in the current setbacks, it would be angled differently. So in that case, I think it's peculiar to this lot. The setbacks, not necessarily. That applies to everyone.
Right.
Every home was built in the historic district was built before those existed. But yeah, I feel like this particular home, the way it's angled, it's a unique. Every piece of land is unique in that sense, and that's the way that I interpret peculiar to this property. If a home were built there today, it wouldn't be the same. It's how the land is today, based off of how it was developed over time, and restricting it that way, I think it is particular to this property.
Well, maybe, unfortunately, knowing quite a bit about the historic district, there are a considerable number of properties that have unique characteristics that may seem similar to this. And so I don't see where this property is sufficiently different from a large number of other properties in the neighborhood and the historic district particularly. I also go right back to I 100% would love to see everyone restore their cottages to how they were originally built. I think that would create a huge amount of charm and uniqueness to the community. And so I endorse that 100%. And if I were convinced that, in fact, that were the case in this situation, I would be 100% for it. But there's no evidence that this cottage was anything different from that what appears today. It's very common. It's a very common design, as a matter of fact, in those days.
I think the deed that was entered into the record shows that a piece of this lot was taken away, or it was subdivided at some point. I think that's another unique fact about this property, although the home was built prior to that subdivision. The way it's situated now, that it was, again, I don't know if every other lot in the village has also been subdivided, but it's another unique characteristic of this piece of property, that it's already not the original lot, so to speak.
Well, and looking at the design of that house, it does not look like it has a front porch on it. The one next door does.
See, it's Exhibit C in your packet, the warranty deed.
Exhibit B, which pretends to be a layout of all the lots in the area as Leonard Tufts sold them in the 1910, 1920 circa area. And so this lot appears to be the same.
It doesn't appear to have a front porch on it.
Well, there's a little protrusion on it, on this particular. That is probably, this is not meant to be a drawing of the actual houses as they sit on a lot necessarily. This is almost an artist's rendition of the sold property and the properties he had for sale at that time. Probably done by Mr. Wicker, who lived across the street from this cottage. I'm reluctant to make a motion on this one here because I'm reluctant to have it not be improved.
Yeah. I understand,
But I
Jack.
can make a motion if you desire. I'd be happy to make a motion if you desire.
Well, I'll give it a shot and we'll see where we get. I would find that unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of the ordinance in this case. And that unnecessary hardship is that the Tanner, Mr. Tanner and Ms. Carpenter will not be able to fully enjoy the community, the unnecessary hardship would result because Mr. Tanner and Ms. Carpenter will not be able to fully enjoy the front porch of their new residence and the community of Old Town Pinehurst. This hardship does result from the conditions that are particular to their property. In this case, the current site of the home and the orientation of the property at a the angle that the home is currently sited. The hardship did not result from any actions taken by the applicant because the home was sited historically sometime in 1915. And the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance in that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. It fits the spirit of our Old Town community and will allow this cottage to be restored, if not exactly to the state that it was in 1915, in a way that is in accordance with the historical nature of Old Town, as will be reviewed by our Historic Preservation Commission.
No conditions?
Is there an and therefore?
Oh, therefore, I am moving to approve this variance.
Without conditions?
Cindy, if you'd like to help me craft a condition that's going to
Just
achieve
asking.
the necessary purpose, I am more than happy to have you amend my motion.
Just asking.
No, I don't have a thought in how we can achieve that. We could condition it to, I don't know, tell me, Alex and Peter, can we condition it to say that this, intrusion into the setback is only, available for a front porch?
It's your motion, so you can make that. It's just keeping that record for eternity and maintaining it is going to cause problems long-term. Like, it won't for the next 5 years or 10 years because Alex and I will be here, but eventually new staff will come in and it could cause problems for them.
Well, then, without conditions, in my mind, we are talking about an extra 1.23 feet.
So is your motion complete then?
My motion is complete.
Second.
Motion has been made by myself, seconded by, was that Philip?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion does not carry. Is there another motion?
Julia, can we do a roll call for that vote so the record can reflect who voted for and
We
against?
absolutely can. Philip, how do you vote?
I vote in favor of the motion.
David?
I vote in favor of the motion.
Jack?
I vote against the motion, no.
Cindy?
I vote against the motion.
Thank you.
And Julia, your vote?
I voted for my motion. Thank you.
So did the motion carry or?
The motion did not carry.
I don't believe it's necessary to have a negative motion if the positive motion does not carry. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Would, Jack and Cindy, would you be amenable to making a motion with conditions? Do you feel like that is appropriate?
I
Can you make such a motion?
I can't envision in conditions and how I would articulate that and how it would be recorded and documented and enforced. That would make sense, to tell you the truth.
I understand.
I agree. I think it just protects the property in the future. They can replace the current porch at the same size that it is now, and not go beyond without a variance. So it isn't like they're not going to have a front porch. But if anyone wants to build anything else on this property, they're going to have to come before the board at a later date because the setback is in place. And if we move the setback, we take away that.
I think keeping the setback as it is doesn't prevent the issue of a tear down and building a monstrosity. That check comes from the historic preservation.
Well, they only have a 1 year more, and they can only hold it for a year, but they can't stop it completely, correct?
But they don't have to go through the village. If they want to put something on there that goes against that setback, they're
Well,
going to
that's
have to
different.
come
Once
to
it's
the
torn
village.
down, the setback applies to the new dwelling. And I certainly hope that the applicant is still, would still plan to do their architectural improvements, because I think they're quite attractive, to tell you the truth, within the confines of the current setback. I mean, it seems to me that a major part of the enhancements and renovation can be accomplished, and maybe some architectural changes from the original design could still make a very, very extremely attractive front of that cottage. I think that's very much possible.
I agree with Jack, and I don't mean to be difficult. I think, as a homeowner, you want to be able to do what you want to do. But our job is also to look at the consequences in the future. The ordinances are in place for a reason. So.
Well, to my mind, as was shared, if there was a tear down, as I understand it, they would have to adhere to the 30-foot setback. They don't get grandfathered, so to speak, although I don't like that term. They don't get to enjoy the encroachment that currently exists. And truly, we're talking about an increased encroachment of about 16 inches. And even if a future owner decided to extend the entire front of the building, that's 16 inches, I don't really think that we're protecting the community from any particular great harm in this instance. And each variance is taken variance by variance, application by application. So I don't think that we're opening up this, the old town to a situation where people are going to be overbuilding. I think that it's unfortunate. I do hope that, as Jack said, that Mr. Tanner will find opportunities to do, something beautiful with this property. And to keep in mind that, as Cindy, I think, pointed out last week, that even if they cannot encroach without this variance further into the setback, further forward into the setback, they can take advantage of that 21.5, that existing setback of, I forget what it's currently at, the encroachment of 7.27 feet, and perhaps do a longer porch, if not a wider one, and achieve some semblance of what they want. I hope that can happen.
Sure, Mr. Tanner is quite familiar with the asking price for the property next door. And so there's value in enhancing these properties.
Absolutely. Okay. If there is, before we close out the hearing, I'll ask if there's any member of the board who wishes to put another motion forward on this variance. Okay, hearing none. Sorry, let me get back to my notes. I'll remind our board that our next meeting date, if a matter is brought before us, is going to be Thursday, April 1st, 2021 at 4:30 p.m. Peter or Alex, do you know of any matters that are in the queue, so to speak?
There are none.
Okay. And with that, I'll ask the board if there's a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the meeting and the public hearing, or the public hearing is already adjourned. Adjourn the meeting,
Is there a second?
I second Jack's motion.
whatever that.
Okay, a motion has been made by Jack, seconded by David. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion made and carried. This meeting is adjourned. And Mr. Tanner, Mr. Degree, thank you very much for appearing twice before us. We appreciate your input.
Thank you.